I rented a place from a woman who promised peace and quiet. On the third day, I found an old cassette tape in the closet with a recording where a man says in a trembling voice, "If you're hearing this, it means I'm still alive, but not here." And then he adds my name. My name is Jonathan Myers, and I make documentary podcasts about real disappearances. I travel across the country, renting temporary accommodations, conducting interviews, and collecting audio. A year ago, I went to Montana to investigate a mysterious case. In 1998, a young psychology professor named Lance Devlin vanished. He simply didn't show up for his lecture. A week later, police entered his house. Everything was in place: his belongings, passport, a mug with unfinished coffee, even a lamp left on. The university cameras weren't working. The case was hushed up. The drive to Pinewood, Montana had been long and tiring. 6 hours of nothing but endless roads cutting through vast expanses of wilderness, the radio fading in and out as mountains rose and fell around me. This small college town wasn't on most maps, which made it perfect for my podcast, Vanished Voices. The more obscure the case, the more interesting the story usually turned out to be. Lance Devlin's disappearance wasn't famous, but it contained elements that fascinated me: a respected academic vanishing without a trace, police investigations that led nowhere, and locals who still whispered about it 2 decades later. Perfect material for my series. I pulled into town as dusk settled, the mountains turning purple against the darkening sky. Main Street consisted of the essentials: a diner, gas station, small supermarket, and the library that doubled as the town hall. The university, really just a small liberal arts college, sat on a hill overlooking everything. I'd arranged accommodation through a private listing, a small wooden house on the outskirts, not far from where Devlin had lived. The property belonged to Mrs. Reed, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. "You must be Jonathan," she said, extending a frail hand as I approached the porch. "I've prepared everything. You'll find peace and quiet here, perfect for your work." She showed me around the house, a 2-story structure that creaked with each step. The floorboards were worn smooth from decades of use, and the air smelled of old books and pine. My living quarters consisted of a bedroom, small study, kitchen, and bathroom. The attic and basement were accessible but filled with storage. "The house has character," Mrs. Reed explained, running her hand along a wooden banister. "It remembers things." I nodded politely, attributing the odd comment to her age. In the kitchen, an old clock hung on the wall, its hands frozen at 3:17. "Your clock isn't working," I pointed out. Mrs. Reed glanced at it with an unreadable expression. "Those hands remember him." I assumed she meant her late husband, another sympathetic nod my only response. After she left, I unpacked my equipment: laptop, recorder, microphones, and my notes on the Devlin case. For 3 days, I settled into a routine: mornings at the local library researching news archives, afternoons interviewing locals who remembered Devlin, evenings organizing my findings. The professor had been well liked but kept to himself. Colleagues described him as brilliant but eccentric, focused on theories about memory and perception. His research had centered on something called place memory, the idea that environments could retain impressions of events that occurred within them. Lance believed places weren't just passive settings, explained Dr. Sarah Winters, his former department colleague. He thought they were active participants in human experience. Sounds new agey, I know, but his research was surprisingly empirical. On the third day, I returned to the house earlier than usual. A thunderstorm had rolled in, canceling my scheduled interview with Devlin's former student. I decided to examine the storage closet in the hallway, hoping to find space for my equipment cases. The closet was cluttered with cardboard boxes, old coats, and the accumulated debris of decades. As I rearranged things, my hand brushed against something hard behind a stack of yellowed magazines. A portable cassette player, dusty but intact, with a tape inside. The cassette had a handwritten label: "John. Play only at night." My heart quickened. John, close enough to Jonathan. Coincidence? I doubted it. Yet how could anyone have known I'd be here, in this specific house, 20 years after Devlin's disappearance? I waited until after midnight to play it, professional curiosity warring with a growing sense of unease. The house seemed to close in around me as the storm intensified outside, raindrops drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. I pressed play. A man's voice, breathless and urgent, filled the room. "This is Lance. If you're Jonathan, then you're not here by accident. You're one of those who search." I don't know exactly where I am. But I'm definitely not dead. Everything here looks similar, but it's not right. You'll find more tapes. But don't play them one after another. They remember the sequence. I froze, finger hovering over the stop button. This couldn't be a prank. The voice sounded authentic, desperate. I compared it with archived interviews I'd collected. The timbre matched almost perfectly. My journalistic skepticism fought with the evidence of my own ears. This was Lance Devlin's voice, recorded somehow, addressing me by name. Sleep evaded me that night. Rain lashed against the windows, and the house seemed alive with creaks and sighs. I replayed the tape several times, analyzing every word, every inflection. By morning, I was convinced, I needed to find the other tapes. I began searching methodically. The attic yielded nothing but dust and old furniture. The main floor, equally empty. Which left the basement. It was colder down there, the air damp and musty. Old shelves lined the walls, filled with preserves and forgotten household items. A disused refrigerator stood in the corner, unplugged and slightly askew. Behind it, taped to the wall in a small alcove, I found 4 more cassettes. Each labeled with my name. Each marked with a date. The first, today. The second, tomorrow. The third, the day after. The fourth was blank. This defied logical explanation. These tapes, hidden years before my arrival, bore dates from the present. My hands trembled as I carried them upstairs, laying them on the kitchen table in sequence. I should have waited. Should have followed the instructions on the first tape. But curiosity, the trait that made me good at my job, overrode caution. I inserted the second tape and pressed play. Lance's voice again, but different, calmer, almost detached. "John, you've broken the sequence. Now you'll hear what I was trying to contain. If the lights in the house start flickering, don't look out the window." As if on cue, the kitchen lamp flickered. Once. Then again. A chill spread through me. I moved to the hallway, drawn to the window despite the warning. Outside, beyond the rain-slicked yard, a field stretched toward distant trees. And there, barely visible in the gloom, stood a figure. Human-shaped. Very far away, but moving in strange, jerky motions. Now closer, now farther, as if being rewound. I backed away from the window. Drew the curtains with shaking hands. Opened the third tape. Everything reproduces here. Memory, behavior, you yourself. This house isn't just a place. It's a mechanism. It chooses those who search. And if you've activated it, you're already inside the cycle. My chest tightened. A ringing filled my head. I tried to leave the house, but the door wouldn't budge. As if the lock didn't recognize me. I slumped against the wall, next to those unmoving clock hands. The clock that remembered him. Suddenly, it began to tick. 1 second. 2. On the 4th, the hands started moving backward. I called Mrs. Reed. She answered immediately, her voice clear despite the storm. "John, you know this house isn't for rent. I closed it 19 years ago. How did you get in there?" I hung up. Checked rental listings, no mention of this property. No trace that I'd paid anyone. Bank statement, empty. As if I'd come here of my own accord, drawn by something beyond conscious decision. The last tape remained empty. I connected it to the recorder, pressed record. And suddenly heard my own voice. It said, "If you're listening to this, I've become Lance. And you are the next Jonathan. This house writes us. Don't repeat my cycle. Or at least pause between the tapes." I stumbled back, recorder clattering to the floor. My voice, but I hadn't spoken those words. Yet. The next morning, I tried again to leave. The door opened easily now, as if whatever had held it shut had released its grip. Outside, the world appeared normal. Birds sang. Sunlight filtered through dissipating clouds. I drove to the university, determined to find someone who could make sense of this. Dr. Winters agreed to meet me for coffee at the campus cafeteria. Lance was working on something unusual before he disappeared, she said, stirring her coffee absently. He'd become obsessed with a property on the edge of town. Said it exhibited unusual properties related to his research. "Mrs. Reed's house," I said flatly. Sarah looked startled. "How did you?" "Yes, that's the one. Though it wasn't Mrs. Reed's then. It belonged to a Dr. Carlton who taught psychology here in the 70s. He disappeared too, actually." Lance was fascinated by the coincidence. I showed her the tape recorder, played snippets of the first recording. Her face paled. "That's Lance. That's definitely Lance. But this is impossible." "What if it isn't?" I challenged. "What if his theories about place memory were correct? What if some locations don't just store memories but actively reproduce them?" She shook her head. "That's not science, Jonathan. That's fantasy. 20 years ago, a man vanished without a trace. Yesterday, I found tapes he recorded that mentioned me by name. Today is the date marked on the second tape. Tell me what part of this fits into conventional explanation." Before she could answer, my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number: "Don't play the fourth tape. L." I showed Sarah, who now looked truly disturbed. "This isn't funny, Jonathan. I'm not trying to be funny. I'm trying to understand what's happening." She pushed back from the table. "I can't help you with this. Whatever game you're playing. It's not a game. Something is happening in that house. Something happened to Lance Devlin. And now it's happening to me." Sarah hesitated, then reached into her bag. "Lance left this with me the day before he disappeared. Said if he didn't come back, I should give it to whoever came asking the right questions." She handed me a small key. "It opens his office. The university preserved it as part of the investigation." Lance's office was a time capsule. Books and papers remained where he'd left them, protected under a thin layer of dust. The university had locked it up after the initial investigation, and as interest in the case faded, it had simply remained that way, a small memorial to the missing professor. I used the key Sarah had given me. Inside, academic journals and research papers covered most surfaces. The walls were lined with bookshelves containing texts on psychology, perception, and more esoteric subjects, quantum physics, theoretical models of time. On his desk sat a framed photo of a young Lance with an older man I didn't recognize. Behind them stood a familiar wooden house. Written on the back, "Dr. Carlton and me, 1992. The mechanism. My heart pounded as pieces clicked into place. Devlin had been investigating Dr. Carlton's disappearance. He'd been studying the house. And now I was investigating Devlin's disappearance, staying in the same house. A pattern. A cycle. I rummaged through papers, searching for anything related to the house or Carlton. In a locked drawer, which the key also opened, I found a journal. Devlin's research notes, densely written and increasingly frantic toward the end. The house operates on recursive loops. Witness A experiences phenomenon X, witness A becomes part of phenomenon X, witness B investigates witness A's experience. Witness B experiences phenomenon X, witness B becomes part of phenomenon X. And so on. The tapes are the key. They exist simultaneously across multiple time frames. Recording on one affects all versions. Breaking sequence causes temporal displacement. The final entry, dated the day before his disappearance, I've set the trap for myself. The only way to break the cycle is to introduce an external observer who can witness without participating. I've left instructions. If you're reading this and your name is Jonathan, it's already too late for you. My name. Again. I photographed everything, tucked the journal inside my jacket, and left the office. Outside, the sky had darkened again, clouds gathering ominously. My phone displayed 3 missed calls from Mrs. Reed. When I called back, a different voice answered, male, distorted by static. Don't return to the house after dark. Then disconnected. I drove there anyway. Questions demanded answers, even as fear tightened around my chest. The house looked different somehow, older, the paint peeling in places that had been intact that morning. Mrs. Reed was there, sitting on the porch. But she wasn't the same. Her eyes were sharper, less clouded by age. You found the office, she said. Not a question. Who are you really? I asked. I'm the caretaker. I maintain the mechanism. What mechanism? She gestured toward the house. Some places are thin. Reality folds back on itself. This house, it creates loops. Replays events with new participants. Lance understood, eventually. Where is he? Everywhere. Nowhere. Inside the loop. I held up the tapes. He made these for me. How did he know my name? Because you've always been the next observer. In every iteration. She stood, suddenly looking weary. It's getting dark. You should come inside. I hesitated. The voice on the phone told me not to enter after dark. She smiled sadly. That was Lance, trying to break the pattern. But some patterns can't be broken, only understood. Come inside, Jonathan. It's time to record your tape. The decision hung before me, enter and continue the cycle, or walk away. But walking away meant abandoning Lance, abandoning the truth. And I'd never walked away from a story. I followed her inside. The house welcomed me with familiar creaks. In the kitchen, the clock hands moved steadily backward. Mrs. Reed, or whoever she was, placed a blank tape in the recorder. Speak, she instructed. Tell him what he needs to know. Who? Lance? No. The next Jonathan. I stared at the recorder, understanding washing over me in a cold wave. I'd heard my voice on the 4th tape. Warning myself. Creating the loop. What if I refuse? Then the cycle breaks. Lance remains trapped. And you disappear. Like Carlton. Like Devlin. They're here. Just not in the way you understand here. Outside, dusk had fallen completely. Through the window, I could see a figure standing in the field. Not moving jerkily now, but watching. Waiting. The recorder sat before me, its blank tape ready. What if some places don't just store memories, but live through them, copying those who try to remember? The choice was mine. Record the message and continue the cycle. Or refuse, breaking the pattern but potentially trapping Lance forever. I reached for the recorder, my finger hovering over the button. What would you do?